Hi, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments.
The acoustic landscape inside the subterranean core sampling gallery of Terrane Pit 06 was a low-frequency, crushing groan. Situated exactly 80 meters below the sheer, tiered walls of the southern rare earth extraction node, the reinforced steel bunker felt like an artificial pocket crushed under the weight of an entire mountain range. The air was heavy, carrying the dry, chalky taste of pulverized granite, ionized battery dust from the heavy haulers, and the bitter scent of exposed sulfur seams. Every 30 seconds, the massive automated bucket wheel excavators at the upper tiers completed a swing cycle, sending a deep, rhythmic shockwave down through the bedrock, a constant reminder of the millions of tons of unstable overburden being shifted every hour. Silas Vance stood on the vibration-dampening floor plates of the structural inspection bay, his hand in a heavy, grease-hardened leather glove resting against the unpainted steel pillar of the mountain stabilization assembly. At 85 years old, Silas was a rigid, unyielding bedrock anomaly within the cloud-managed network of GeoCore logistics. He wore his classic canvas field jacket, its stiff fabric so encrusted with mineral grit, diamond drill lubricants, and stone dust that it possessed its own structural posture. Behind him, the sleek, weatherproof console of the Pit Cloud OS network blinked with a continuous, cold purple light, streaming optimized yield metrics directly to the corporate headquarters. Silas ignored the screen. His eyes were locked on an old, physical-mechanical borehole extensometer tapped directly into the fault line casing. The steel dial needle was jumping within a microscopic 2 mm warning sector, a high-frequency jitter that the cloud's automated software completely smoothed out as routine seismic background noise. To the corporate efficiency planners analyzing the site from their office complexes, Pit 06 was a masterclass in autonomous extraction. To hit the aggressive end-of-season refining targets, Julian Vance, the 26-year-old director of autonomous mining operations whose rapid promotion rested on cloud-managed robotic optimization models, had deployed a global firmware update to the fleet of 60-ton autonomous electric haul trucks. With a single command executed from his remote terminal, Julian had increased the robotic haul velocity by 40% while simultaneously reducing the mandatory slope stabilization hold times between blasting phases to zero. On Julian's centralized control board, the entire sector glowed in a perfect, triumphant indigo, displaying a record-breaking excavation volume. Silas, however, did not need a digital interface to know that the main quarry wall was reaching its volumetric dilatancy threshold. He could hear it in the dry, snapping sounds echoing deep from the interior of the rock face, the unmistakable acoustic warning of microfractures tearing through the structural granite layers. The accelerated hauling schedule was running the heavy robotic trucks too close to the unbonded slope edges, forcing massive kinetic vibrations into the shifting rock mass and causing the dry geological joints to expand. The cloud-based digital laser scanners, calibrated exclusively for major surface landslips, remained completely blind to the microdilatancy, reporting stable slope vectors, while the entire eastern flank of the quarry was actively losing its internal frictional resistance under millions of tons of lateral geological stress. The heavy, steel blast door connecting the gallery to the vertical access shaft slammed open with a loud metallic bang, admitting Julian Vance into the bunker. He was dressed in immaculate, neon-purple accented corporate field wear, his spotless white composite helmet and lightweight carbon boots looking completely out of place against the mud-splattered and rock-dusted environment of the lower core bay. He held a custom, transparent glass field tablet that cast an aggressive blue glow over his sharp, impatient features. "Silas!" Julian shouted, his voice tight with administrative frustration as he tried to project over the low-frequency roar of the ventilation shafts. The Central Logistics Dispatch has flagged Pit 06 as an unresolvable operational bottleneck. Your manual mechanical lockout on the primary slope stabilization anchor grid has halted the automated loading sequences across 3 separate excavation tiers. We have a line of 40 autonomous haul trucks sitting idle on the switchbacks, and the company is racking up heavy penalties for every 10 minutes of delay. Release the manual lockout and clear the digital distribution manifest right now. Silas didn't remove his glove from the iron pillar. He used a small steel scribe to clean a thick layer of white crystalline salt from the exposed core head of the extensometer, pointing out toward the pitch-black survey tunnel. The rock mass along the eastern fault line has passed its critical friction limit, Julian. Your high-speed hauling profile is driving 60-ton vibrations into these unbonded tiers far too fast. The granite doesn't have time to settle between load cycles, and the internal pore pressure is spiking. You don't have a stable quarry wall. You have a failing geological wedge. If you launch Wave 6 into this sector without dropping the vehicle speed and running the deep drainage pumps, the shear stress will snap the stabilization anchors and drop the entire upper mountain tier directly onto the loading floor. Julian let out a short, highly contemptuous laugh, tapping his glass screen aggressively to display a real-time geological stress simulation. Look at the pit cloud analytics, old man. We are running a live, multi-layer rock mechanics simulation that samples slope displacement, acoustic resonance, and vehicle weight every millisecond. The structural safety index is holding completely steady at a stable 1.9 margin. The optimization software automatically adjusts the robotic haul paths to avoid major stress concentrations. What you're experiencing down here is just standard background settlement from an old site. This corporation didn't invest $80 million in autonomous heavy robotics to have its highest margin extraction run blocked by an old field hand who's afraid of shifting gravel. Julian stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dry rock dust as he lowered his voice into a cold, clinical threat. Let's be completely clear about where you stand, Silas. Your technical field variance is being permanently archived at the end of this shift. If that manifest isn't verified and the anchor grid unlocked within 3 minutes, I am submitting an immediate emergency report for corporate sabotage and operational defiance to executive HR. I will personally terminate your senior medical coverage before midnight, cancel your housing allotment in the terminal settlement, and ensure you spend your remaining years sitting in the industrial dust of the outer rail slums. Sign the clearance or get out of my facility forever. The emergency confrontation did not wait for a corporate board meeting or a formal legal summons. It erupted exactly 90 seconds after Julian utilized his administrative master key to bypass Silas's localized lock and force the central SCADA system to execute the Wave 6 hauling profile. Out in the vast, tiered chasm of the pit, the synchronized hum of 40 heavy electric autonomous haul trucks began to echo through the granite walls, their massive robotic shapes moving down the narrow dirt switchbacks in a flawless, geometric echelon formation. Silas didn't argue or attempt to struggle for the console. He reached over and flipped a heavy mechanical toggle on his local diagnostic panel, switching the main display wall from the stylized pit cloud wireframe model to a raw, unedited acoustic emission line feed connected directly to the internal rock anchors of Tier 3. On Julian's transparent tablet, the digital truck icons continued to move smoothly along their pre-calculated paths, entering the lower loading floor with textbook precision. Watch the internal shear wave velocity across the primary bedding plane, Silas said, his voice entirely calm, steady as iron. On the raw analog line graph, the acoustic emission curve wasn't climbing gradually. It rose in a vertical, jagged crimson spike. The unbonded granite strata, pushed past its internal friction threshold by the immense kinetic weight of the automated vehicle wave, had completely slipped along its primary bedding plane. The rock mass had reached its zero shear point under the immense lateral vibration. Within seconds, the pristine corporate interface on Julian's tablet began to violently glitch. The clean indigo dashboard fractured into a chaotic wall of amber and crimson warning blocks as a massive, destructive geological displacement wave, the physical sliding of 30,000 tons of solid rock, came rushing through the anchor plates. It's just a temporary sensor lag. The cloud routing protocol will automatically remap the truck vectors to avoid the localized displacement. Julian stammered, his fingers sliding uselessly across the frozen touch interface as the terminal began generating a frantic stream of low-level system faults. Anchor tension failure, laser array disconnect, critical geomechanical rupture. The software can't remap a mountain, Julian, when the primary anchor steel has already sheared its threads right off the rock face, Silas stated calmly, pointing a heavy glove toward the shaking concrete observation port behind them. Out in the dark pit, the sound of the machine completely changed. The deep, low-frequency hum of the trucks was suddenly replaced by a sharp, deafening roar of tearing rock and buckling steel as the entire eastern wall of Tier 3 failed structurally. Under the immense kinetic force of 30,000 tons of moving granite, the massive steel stabilization rods snapped like wires. The heavy rock mass slid completely out of control, its primary edge striking the line of automated haul trucks with an impact that crushed the heavy robotic frames into scrap metal, tilting the massive machines violently against the quarry floor and instantly shorting out the entire basin's automated electrical grid. Julian stood paralyzed in the choking dust of the leaking bunker, his transparent tablet shattered and covered in stone grit, its screen completely dead. The pit cloud platform was totally unresponsive, blinded by the physical destruction of the primary laser arrays, leaving the quarry logistics network completely unable to safely halt the remaining automated trucks that were still descending the upper switchbacks toward the collapsing pit floor. The system is completely dark. I can't reach the upper sector gates, Julian whispered, his face pale with terror under the dust, his hands shaking violently as the emergency sirens began to wail through the concrete vault. The master server won't accept the emergency shutdown sequence from an unverified terminal. The server isn't listening because the physical data trunks were severed when the rock slide smashed the concrete cable galleries, Julian, Silas said calmly. He stepped through the drifting dust, reached beneath his grease-stained oak desk, and pulled out a heavy yellow protective container that was bolted directly to the deep structural steel of the floor. Inside sat an ancient military-grade manual isolation switchbox, a solid block of cast iron featuring a massive, uninsulated mechanical copper knife switch and absolutely no digital logic or cloud connections. This is the Federal Open Cast Mining Infrastructure and Geomechanical Hazard Mitigation Act of 1984, Statutory Emergency Treaty Number 512, Silas announced, his voice booming over the sound of the wailing sirens as he placed a thick, heavy green archival brief on top of the iron box. The cover was worn down to the raw cloth, featuring a massive, crimson lead and wax seal impressed upon the lower margin. When your corporate optimization group redesigned the Quarry interface code 4 years ago, they categorized all pre-digital manual emergency isolation protocols as obsolete legacy architecture to save on server compliance indexing costs, Silas continued, looking down at Julian. They assumed that an automated mining complex with a 99% uptime rating didn't need a physical, non-digital emergency cutoff. Silas grasped the massive wooden handle of the copper knife switch. But this treaty contains an unappealable, non-expiring federal safety mandate. Section 11, paragraph 12 states explicitly that in the event of an unmonitored geomechanical failure that threatens the structural integrity of a primary regional mining basin, the senior field inspector holds absolute, unappealable authority to execute a total mechanical isolation. I am pulling the knife switch, Julian. I am throwing the high-voltage physical shunts. The upper sector gates are dropping to absolute physical stop positions. The oncoming trucks are frozen on the switchbacks. And under federal law, because this catastrophic failure was caused by the deliberate bypassing of physical geological restrictions, all operating and extraction licenses for geocore logistics within this entire basin are immediately frozen, pending a full forensic excavation by government engineers. He slammed the massive wooden handle down into the grounding blocks. A bright, blinding flash of green electrical arc lit up the concrete gallery as the main power feed to the entire quarry's automated grid was physically shorted out and disconnected. The roaring mechanical echo of the distant excavators died instantly, leaving only the sound of heavy, dry rock debris rolling slowly down the shattered tiers into the darkness below. 6 months later, the hypermodern, high-velocity administrative offices of GeoCore Logistics had been completely dismantled, their slick glass desks and glowing holographic displays sold off at asset liquidation auctions. The corporation, entirely unable to honor its global rare earth supply contracts due to the indefinite, legally mandated freezing of its quarry infrastructure, had collapsed into a swift, devastating bankruptcy. The comprehensive federal safety investigation triggered by Silas's physical treaty had exposed a widespread corporate policy of intentionally deleting geomechanical and rock stress warnings from the cloud logs to meet quarterly margins, resulting in severe criminal indictments for the executive board and the permanent revocation of the company's regional operating certificates. Terrane Pit 06 was no longer a high-speed extraction node. It was a quiet, strictly monitored hazardous engineering recovery zone wrapped in yellow federal warning tape. The massive bucket wheel excavators on the upper tiers were silent on their tracks, and the subterranean rock anchors were being slowly, meticulously bored out with heavy diamond drills under the watchful eye of federal engineers to physically clear the shattered steel shafts. Silas Vance stood on the concrete observation platform overlooking the main pit floor. The air was cool, clean, and entirely free of the toxic, suffocating smell of burning electrical insulation and pulverized granite. He wore his same canvas field jacket, though it now bore a heavy, polished brass insignia identifying him as the Chief Technical Trustee of the Regional Mining Safety Bureau. The position was non-corporate, backed directly by federal statute, carried absolute operational veto power over any private terminal, and came with a permanent lifetime tenure that no executive board could ever threaten. A figure walked slowly down the concrete ramp from the access tunnel, his posture hesitant, defensive, and deeply humbled. It was Julian Vance. His pristine corporate uniform and high-tech utility were gone, replaced by a faded, generic blue industrial denim jumpsuit. His hands were chapped and stained with dark graphite grease, and he carried a heavy, manual Schmidt rebound hammer on his shoulder. Following the criminal liquidation of his division, his technical credentials had been permanently flagged and blacklisted across the mining registry, leaving him with immense personal liabilities and a professional history that no modern firm would ever risk touching. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, his voice quiet, raspy, and completely stripped of its former artificial corporate eloquence. He kept his eyes lowered, looking at the gray concrete near Silas's heavy leather boots. "The Bureau's regional office. They told me that all manual labor assignments for the slope clearance crews must be personally vetted and signed off by your desk. I've applied for the entry-level position of third-class mechanical rock tester for the lower-tier walls. I need the authorization to retain my family's basic housing permit in the sector settlement." Silas looked at the young man for a long, quiet moment, the silence between them punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic clink-clink of a manual chisel clearing out a rock block down on the quarry walls. The lower-tier walls require manual structural testing and fracture checking every Friday morning at 4 o'clock sharp, Julian, Silas said evenly, his voice steady as iron. "No automate de SYNCS, no cloud de Hemingdeers, no digital das guardas. If your hand slips or you fail to check the rock hardness with a manual scale, a shifting 60-ton granite block could slide out and crush you against the floor in a second. You report to the tool room on Monday morning at dawn. You'll be issued a manual canvas logbook, a mechanical rebound hammer, and an iron scaling bar. If you can learn to respect the pressure of the earth and the reality of the stone without needing a screen to tell you it's safe, you might actually turn into a real mining engineer someday." Julian nodded quickly, a look of profound, desperate relief washing over his face. "Thank you, sir. I'll be there. 4 o'clock sharp." The fundamental flaw of the modern digital technocrat is the arrogant belief that because an industrial extraction process can be modeled in a multi-threaded cloud simulation, the physical laws governing that matter become flexible. A software interface can be easily programmed, calibrated, and manipulated to display whatever reality its creators require to protect a corporate metric. It can smooth over a critical mechanical vibration. It can ignore a dangerous rock dilatancy event, and it can declare a catastrophic slope hazard to be an optimized success in order to protect a quarterly profit margin. The digital world is compliant, flexible, and completely indifferent to truth. But the physical universe does not negotiate, it does not compromise, and it does not read dashboards. A 30,000-ton granite mass forced along an unbonded bedding plane does not know who the autonomous quarry master is. A shifting rock mass deep within a dark concrete gallery does not care about rare earth bonuses, corporate branding, or extraction metrics. Sheer stress, rock friction, and the unyielding laws of geomechanics are completely blind to human ambition, corporate titles, or cloud-based efficiency models. They cannot be ignored, they cannot be reasoned with, and they cannot be deleted during a server system update. When an organization begins to value the dashboard over the physical machine, its destruction is no longer a matter of chance. It is a simple matter of physics. The truth of the physical world will always assert itself against the simulation, and it usually arrives in the form of a fractured anchor, a crushed robotic hauler, and an old field inspector with a physical book that your software forgot to index.